Sit down, Danny, before you embarrass yourself even more. My brother's voice cut through the clinking of glasses and the laughter of cousins around the long Thanksgiving table. His smirk sharpened by the candlelight, his words slapping me harder than if he'd thrown his beer across the room. Eyes turned. Chairs creaked. My teenage daughter, Emily, froze beside me, her fork halfway to her lips, her cheeks flushing with that quick shame teenagers feel when the ground shifts beneath their parents' dignity. I wanted to shield her, but the room itself had become a spotlight, my failure illuminated in front of everyone I had spent years trying to prove myself to. My name is Daniel Harris, 42 years old, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, and I swear on my father's old leather work gloves, I have never hated hearing my own name until that moment. Everyone waited for me to swallow the humiliation, but what they didn't know, what I couldn't reveal yet, was that I had one thing in my pocket they could never take from me. A secret advantage that I had been sharpening quietly, waiting for the right cut. The turkey on the table smelled of rosemary and butter, steam rising off mashed potatoes, the usual symbols of warmth and family. But the cranberry sauce glistened under the lights like a bloodstain. That bowl, untouched so far, would become more than just food tonight. It would become the emblem of everything sour, everything unspoken, everything broken in this family. My brother Mark knew it too. He always did. He'd been needling me with that cranberry sauce joke since college, when Mom used to say, I never brought anything to the table but bitterness. He'd turned her cutting little line into his party trick, wheeling it out at every holiday, every reunion, until it became a tradition I couldn't laugh at anymore. I tried to laugh anyway, tried to make my shoulders roll loose. But the cousins chuckled, the uncles shifted uncomfortably, and my daughter's eyes darted to me with that desperate plea. Don't lose it, Dad. Don't give him the satisfaction. Mark leaned back in his chair, a glass of bourbon swinging lazily in his hand, his tie loosened like he was the king of this suburban kingdom. Always chasing big dreams, huh? Still waiting for one to land? At least you're consistent. His wife, Laura, smirked at his side, and I saw her nails, red and polished, tap twice on the tablecloth, like punctuation. The room buzzed with the forced laughter of people who didn't want to pick sides. Emily lowered her eyes to her plate. My chest burned. I wanted to flip that cranberry bowl into his lap, watch it stain his perfect shirt, watch him scramble for once instead of me. But I didn't. Not yet. Because here's what no one at that table knew. Humiliation has a shelf life. If you keep it bottled long enough, it ferments into something sharper, something dangerous. Like wine forgotten in a cellar, it only grows stronger in the dark. Before we get deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I looked across the table and saw my father's empty chair, the one no one had dared sit in since he passed. The memory of him, quiet strength, calloused hands, the smell of motor oil and coffee steadied me. He used to tell me, a man's worth isn't measured at the table where others feast, but in the silence after they're gone. I clenched my fists beneath the tablecloth, nails biting into my palms, the words searing into me. Mark raised his glass, toasting himself more than anyone else. To family and to those who keep us entertained. The cousins laughed. Even my mother forced a smile, her eyes darting to me with pity, and pity was worse than mockery. Pity hollowed you out. I felt Emily's small hand brush against mine under the table, a quiet tether, a plea for me to hold on. That's the thing about being a father. Even when you're bleeding inside, you want to look unshaken for your child. But sometimes the most powerful thing isn't hiding the wound, it's choosing when to show the scar. Mark thought he had me cornered, thought he was still the golden boy, the one who always had the job, the house, the respect. He didn't know that I'd been watching, collecting, waiting. People like him leave trails, emails, messages, receipts, and sometimes the truth hides in the smallest overlooked detail. The cranberry sauce sat there, mocking me with its shine. I stared at it until my vision blurred, until it felt like the whole table revolved around that bowl, and maybe it did. Because someday, when all this was over, that cranberry red would come back to him in a way he couldn't laugh off. The night stretched long, the clatter of silverware filling the silences between his jabs. Every remark was a knife dressed as a joke. Every chuckle from the cousins was salt in the wound. And through it all, Emily's shoulders sank lower and lower, her trust in me leaking away like air from a punctured tire. I swallowed my anger like whiskey, burning but steadying. And in that burn, I made a silent vow. Tonight was the last time Mark Harris would ever mock me without consequence, because the truth was already in my hands. And the trap was already set. But setting a trap is one thing. Keeping your heartbeat steady until the jaws close is another. My brother leaned back, laughing too loudly at his own lines, bourbon breath spilling into the air, and I watched the way his wife glanced at him, not with love, but with calculation. Lavra had always been sharper than him, colder, the kind of woman who knew the exact value of everything, including people. Her smirk tonight was a shade too thin, like she was hiding a crack in the glass. The cousins shifted to their phones when the laughter died down, pretending to check football scores, but really escaping the tension. I caught a reflection in the dark window behind them, my own face, rigid, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. It was the look of a man balancing between swallowing fire and spitting it out. Emily excused herself, muttering something about homework, though it was Thanksgiving and everyone knew no teacher in America was cruel enough to assign it. She just couldn't stand to sit there watching her father become the family's punchline. That cut deeper than any of Mark's jabs. Her retreat was proof that I was losing ground, not just in this room, but in her eyes. I sat there, half listening to talk about promotions, new cars, new vacation homes, the chatter of people building towers of success out of bricks they hadn't even carried themselves. Mark raised his phone once, flashing a photo of his new lake house in Michigan, and the table hummed with admiration. His screen lit up brighter than his words, and for a moment, no one looked at me at all. But I looked at him, really looked. At the way his thumb hovered over the phone, quick, nervous, like he didn't want anyone else holding it too long. At the way Laura's fingers tightened around her wine glass when he bragged. She knew something. I could see it in the way she avoided his eyes, in the way her silence wasn't passive but deliberate. I made a mental note: silence is often the loudest confession in the room. I excused myself too, but unlike Emily, I didn't go upstairs. I slipped out to the porch, the November air biting at my skin, headlights from passing cars cutting through the quiet suburban street. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the folder I had been building for months. Screenshots, chats, emails forwarded to myself, bank transfers that didn't add up, Venmo notes too sloppy to erase the truth. Every piece of digital dust he thought no one would notice, I had swept into my hands. I stared at the screen, my breath fogging in the cold, and whispered to myself, revenge is patience dressed as silence. It sounded like something my father would have said if he'd ever believed in revenge. He didn't, but then again, he never had a brother like mine. The sliding door opened behind me. My mother stepped out, her cardigan pulled tight, her face lined with the exhaustion of keeping peace that never existed. "Danny," she said softly, Don't make tonight worse." Her voice cracked on the word worse, and I almost broke, almost told her everything. But then I remembered her laugh at Mark's toast, her silence when he mocked me. She'd always looked the other way, always let him be the golden boy while I clawed for scraps of pride. "I'm not making it worse, Mom," I said, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. "I'm just waiting for the right time to make it fair." She didn't respond. She just sighed, heavy and tired, and went back inside. The cold steadied me. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and returned to the table. The cranberry sauce sat there, still untouched, its red deepening as if it had soaked up the heat of the candles. Mark noticed me looking. "Don't worry, Danny," he said loudly. "We saved you your favorite." The cousins chuckled again, like sheep trained to follow the bell. I forced a smile. "Funny," I said, my voice lower, steadier than I felt. "But some things are an acquired taste. You choke on them if you're not careful." His grin faltered just slightly, just for a second. It was enough. The night dragged into pie and coffee, the kitchen buzzing with the clatter of plates and the faint hum of football commentary from the living room. Mark cornered me near the sink, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You really should learn to take a joke, Danny. That's why people like me get ahead. We don't get stuck." I looked him dead in the eye, closer than brothers should ever stand, and said, "No, Mark, people like you get sloppy, and sloppy always leaves a trail." He blinked, caught off guard, then laughed it off like I told a bad joke. But his laugh was brittle now, tinny, not the booming confidence he wore at the table. When I went upstairs later to check on Emily, she was sitting cross-legged on the bed, headphones in, her face pale. She pulled them out when she saw me. "Dad, why do you let him do that to you?" The question wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was honest. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of her disappointment heavier than anything I'd carried all night. Because sometimes, I said slowly, the best way to win a fight is to let the other guy think you're losing. Until the moment you're not. She looked at me, searching my face for proof, and maybe she found a flicker of it, because she nodded slightly. Still, the shame in her eyes lingered. That shame wasn't hers. It was mine, passed down like a curse. And curses, I decided right then, needed breaking. Downstairs, the laughter picked up again, another round of bourbon poured, another story told at my expense. But I didn't flinch anymore. I knew something they didn't. Every cruel word, every smirk, every silence from the ones who should have defended me. All of it was fuel. And fuel only matters when you're ready to light the match. That night, as the house settled and everyone drifted to their rooms, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of Mark and Laura arguing down the hall. Her voice sharp, his defensive. Something about messages, something about being careless. I closed my eyes and let the words sink into me like a lullaby. The cracks were already showing. All I had to do was widen them. And when I did, the whole house, the whole family would see who really deserved to choke. The morning after smelled of burnt coffee and reheated stuffing, the kitchen crowded with the clatter of pans and the thin politeness of people trying to survive one more day together. Mark strutted in late unshaven, sunglasses on, though the blinds were barely open, his voice booming like he owned not just the room but the air inside it. "Rough night, Danny? Heard you pacing. Guess some of us just don't sleep easy when we've got nothing to our name." He said it in front of Emily again, and I swear I felt her shrink an inch, as if her own spine couldn't carry the weight of watching me bend. Laura brushed past him with a cutting glare. No makeup yet. Robe knotted tight. She didn't bother to hide her disgust. "Don't starch," she muttered, too sharp to be casual. He pretended not to hear, pouring himself coffee like her words had bounced off. But they didn't. I saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his hand shook just slightly when he set down the pot, cracks spreading wider. I took a slow sip from my mug, black and bitter, and thought, the louder a man brags, the more terrified he is of silence. By noon, the cousins had scattered to the backyard for touch football, uncles cracking beers from the cooler, aunts gossiping over pie tins. I stayed near the house, my phone buzzing with the weight of evidence. Emily lingered beside me, restless, like she was torn between wanting to escape and wanting to see if I'd finally fight back. Mark came over during halftime, tossing the football lazily between his hands. "You're awfully quiet, little brother," he said. "Plotting your next big failure?" The ball spun, leather flashing in the weak sun. He grinned like a man convinced gravity always worked in his favor. "Something like that," I said evenly, my eyes never leaving his. He tossed the ball hard against my chest, and though it stung, I caught it. His smirk widened. He thought he'd won another round. But what he didn't know was that every word, every glance, every sloppy move he'd made in his arrogance was already logged in the quiet vault of my phone. Later, while the game roared and laughter spilled across the yard, I slipped inside and found Laura in the den, phone in hand, face pale. She looked up at me, startled, like a thief caught mid-act. For a moment we just stared, the silence heavy with things neither of us wanted to say first. Then she hissed, "You don't know what you think you know, Danny. Leave it alone." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I stepped closer, lowering mine. "He's been sloppy. You've seen it too. You're just waiting for the right moment to decide whether you're his shield or his executioner." Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. She didn't confirm, she didn't deny. She just turned the phone face down on the couch cushion and walked out. And that, more than words, told me everything. She wasn't going to protect him forever. That night, after the family finally collapsed into exhaustion, I sat alone in the dim light of the dining room, the cranberry sauce still sitting on the sideboard, its sheen dulled now, forgotten. I lifted the bowl, staring into the red, and thought of my father's line again. A man's worth is measured in the silence after they're gone. Mark thought he owned the noise. But silence, I realized, was mine. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the screenshot folder. The one that mattered most wasn't the bank transfers or the late-night Venmo slips with cryptic emojis. It was the text exchange between Mark and a client, a married client, messages full of innuendo and carelessness, sent from his company phone. That alone wasn't fatal. But the contract clause I had also screenshotted, the one forbidding personal use of company devices, the one he'd signed himself, that was the loaded gun. Procedural justice, the kind that doesn't just cut but bleeds slow. I stared at the messages until the glow of the screen burned into my eyes, then set the phone down and whispered to myself, revenge isn't about striking first. It's about striking last and leaving nothing standing. The next day, tension snapped like old wires. Lavra barely spoke to him, and when she did, it was acid. Emily avoided everyone, burying herself in her laptop at the corner of the living room. My mother fluttered uselessly, pretending nothing was wrong, her holiday apron stained with gravy. And Mark? He doubled down. More jokes, more smirks, more bourbon before noon. But the louder he got, the more obvious it became. He was cracking. When he mocked me during the group photo, shoved me half out of frame, saying, "Don't worry, Danny, we'll crop you in later." Something shifted in the cousins' laughter. It wasn't as sharp, not as certain. Some of them glanced at each other, uncomfortable. He was starting to look cruel instead of funny. And cruelty without charm doesn't win an audience. That night, as snow flurries dusted the backyard and the lights twinkled on the porch, I slipped outside again. Emily followed, pulling her hoodie tight. "Dad," she said quietly, "you keep saying you're waiting. But for what? He's never going to stop." I looked at her, the cold air stinging my lungs, and said, "Sometimes the best way to end a storm is not to run from it, but to cut down the tree it keeps striking." She frowned, confused, but I could see the flicker of belief returning in her eyes. She didn't need to know the details yet. She just needed to know I wasn't broken. Inside, laughter roared again, but it sounded different now. Hollow. Forced. Like the family was laughing because that's what they'd always done, not because they believed anymore. And Mark, with his glass raised, didn't notice that the echo he loved so much was beginning to fracture. I checked my phone one last time before bed, scrolling to the draft email, the attachments lined up neatly. Screenshots, contracts, receipts. All it needed was a send button. Not yet, not tonight. But soon, because when the jaws close, they close fast. And I wanted him wide-eyed when they snapped shut. The cranberry bowl sat in the fridge, shoved behind leftovers, its color darker now, congealed, forgotten, just like me. But nothing stays forgotten forever. And when that bowl came back to the table, it wouldn't be as a joke. The final night of the holiday always carried a brittle edge. The family gathered one last time in the dining room, coats half sipped, leftovers reheating, everyone eager to escape but unwilling to admit it. Mark, desperate to reclaim control, filled the silence with another round of bourbon-soaked stories. His laughter boomed, but the cousins' chuckles had thinned into polite murmurs. Even my mother's smile was forced, trembling at the edges like a cracked plate. I sat at the end of the table, quiet, steady, my phone heavy in my pocket. Emily sat beside me, her eyes darting between us, caught in the storm's eye. Mark leaned forward, eyes red-rimmed, and raised his glass. "To Danny," he said, voice loud, mockery sharp, "for always keeping things interesting. You may not ever bring success to the table, but hey, at least you bring the cranberry sauce." The cousins laughed weakly, but no one's heart was in it. The joke had grown stale. The cranberry bowl sat in front of him this time, its red sheen dull but defiant. He picked up the spoon, scooping a wobbling mound onto my plate with exaggerated flourish. "Go on, Danny. Show us how it's done." The spoon clattered against the china, and in that sound I heard the snap of the trap. I stood slow and deliberate. My chair scraped against the hardwood, every eye turning toward me. Emily's breath caught. Mark grinned, thinking he'd baited me into another scene. But scenes only matter when you control the script. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped once, and cast the screen to the big television on the wall. The glow filled the room. Conversations died, forks froze midair. And then the words appeared, black and white and undeniable. His messages, his late-night whispers to the married client, every sloppy emoji, every careless phrase. Gasps rippled around the table. Laura's face drained white, her hand trembling around her wine glass until it slipped and shattered against the floor. Mark lunged up, his voice sharp. "This is bullshit." But I swiped again, and the contract clause appeared in full, his own signature glaring back at him from the scanned page. The cousins shifted uncomfortably, uncles muttering, aunts whispering. Emily's eyes widened, not with shame anymore, but with something closer to awe procedural justice. He'd built his empire on arrogance, but a single overlooked clause was enough to bring the whole thing crashing down. Laura's voice sliced through the silence. "You idiot," she spat at him, trembling with rage. "You signed that. You sent those messages. Do you realize what this means?" Her hands shook, not with shock, but with fury that her careful facade had been shattered by his carelessness. Mark stammered, "It's out of context, But I cut him off, my voice low and steady. "Context doesn't erase signatures. Or screenshots. Or receipts." I tapped once more and a spreadsheet appeared. Transfers, Venmo notes, money sliding where it shouldn't. The evidence glared at him like headlights on a dark road. The room buzzed, whispers growing louder. Cousins recording on their phones, uncles muttering about ruined reputations. And then Emily spoke, her voice small but sharp. "You always made fun of my dad, but at least he's honest." That cut deeper than anything I could have said. Mark froze, his face crumbling as the room turned against him. For years he'd thrived on their laughter. Now their silence was his executioner. I lifted the cranberry bowl, the once forgotten joke, and set it firmly in front of him. "Go on, Mark," I said softly. "You wanted me to choke on it. Now it's yours." He stared at the red mass, his hand trembling as he realized the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The cousins exchanged glances, the aunts whispered, and Laura stood abruptly, leaving the table with a slam of the door. The final blow wasn't the evidence, or the whispers, or even Laura's disgust. It was the sound of his kingdom collapsing in real time. The cousins posting, the messages spreading, the whispers leaking faster than he could contain. By morning, the screenshots would be viral, the contract clause dissected, his career shredded not by a competitor, but by his own arrogance. He tried to lunge at me, fury replacing fear, but two uncles restrained him, muttering about calling someone, about getting him out before he embarrassed himself further. His face burned red, veins bulging, spittle flying as he shouted my name like a curse. But curses only matter if they stick, and his bounced harmlessly off the armor of truth. Emily's hand slid into mine under the table, her grip firm, steady, proud. That pride was worth more than every victory he'd ever stolen from me. Mark was dragged from the room, shouting, swearing, collapsing under the weight of his own exposure. The cranberry sauce sat there, untouched now, its surface trembling from the vibrations of his rage, and in that trembling I saw justice. The family dispersed quickly after, murmurs trailing, eyes wide, the holiday shattered beyond repair. My mother wept softly in the kitchen, torn between sons, but even she couldn't deny what she'd seen. Silence fell heavy across the house, just as my father had once promised. When Emily and I stepped outside into the cold night, snow crunching under our boots, she looked up at me and said, "You didn't just fight back, you ended it." I nodded, the weight of victory heavy but not sweet. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "justice doesn't roar, it whispers. And it leaves scars we can live with." We walked to the car, headlights cutting across the snow, and I knew this: revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't erase, but it balances the scales long enough to stand tall again. And in America, sometimes that's all a man can ask for, not to win, not to be loved, but to walk away with his name still his own. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us share more true stories like this.